Hi, my name's Marcus and welcome to Recess. My guest today is Giskin Day. Giskin has over 20 years of experience teaching in science communications and medical humanities. In 2016, she was awarded the National Teaching Fellowship in Use of Playful Learning. She is currently the pathway lead for Humanities, Philosophy and Law at Imperial College for the School of Medicine. She is currently undertaking her PhD part-time at King's College London in Gratitude in Healthcare. She's going to be talking to us today about the playful learning approach. Thank you, Giskin.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's a real pleasure to talk about one of my favorite aspects of teaching, which is playful learning. So I thought I'd start by thinking about why we could incorporate play in education. And for me, it's really an important way of promoting engagement and participation. With a very crowded curriculum and lots of students feeling very stressed, especially about assignments quite a lot of the time, being playful is a wonderful way to just create a different sort of temperature in the class. One in which people can collaborate, talk to each other, compete perhaps, but it does help to catalyze a learning experience as being more memorable. I think particularly in the pandemic, where we were all sitting in the same place in front of our screens for so long, it's very difficult to make content memorable unless the environment around it is changed up a bit. Certainly that's why perhaps things learned on field trips are far more memorable than those that are learned in static locations that are unvarying day on day. So engagement, participation, memorability, these are all good reasons to introduce some games into education. Certainly it stimulates creativity and empathy, and that's not just for the players, that's certainly for educationalists who incorporate games in their teaching. I know that I am at my most creative when I'm involved in game design, and it's also the time when I spend most time thinking about what it's like to be in students' shoes. Finally, I think it's really important to allow participants to be in a safe, imaginative space. With a lot of medical students, those are my main teaching audience, the fear of failure is very real, and there's a lot of emphasis placed on getting the right answer. If there's a little bit of randomness in the mix that comes with games, then actually it's not entirely your fault if you don't come out on top. It feels like that randomness gives you a bit of permission to be experimental. And it's not the end of the world if you fail. Coming to terms with failure is a really important educational lesson. And, being imaginative and creative in ambiguous spaces that games provide. Within a safe kind of framework in which the game mechanism works to create an infrastructure, I think can be incredibly useful. There are, of course, potential drawbacks. The main one is that it could be seen as organized infantilism. Students are grown-ups, they're adults, they don't want to be treated like nursery school children anymore, or infant school, or even primary school children. So one has to take care to, although I think certainly good game design can incorporate elements of nostalgia for the kinds of times in which we were unembarrassed about being creative and playful, but it shouldn't infantilize, you should never infantilize your students. There's also a danger that learning outcomes could get lost, especially in frenetic games. Those of us that have played escape rooms, for example, you rarely come out of an escape room having learnt anything meaningful because it's so full on at the time. So quite a lot of it is about the process rather than the product. That does mean that learning outcomes can sometimes get lost, although I would say that escape type games are great for consolidating knowledge, allowing students to practice what they already know and to revise that. There's a lot of competitiveness in universities already. We should not be necessarily encouraging that. So one has to take care not to endorse unhealthy competitiveness. A bit of competitiveness can be a stimulant, of course, but one just needs to take a bit of care with that, I think. You don't ever want to be seen as trivializing content. especially in medical school, there are quite some difficult subjects, and one never wants to make a game, for example, about the suffering of others or to belittle an important subject. So you do have to be careful about what you choose to incorporate in playful learning, and make sure that you're still being respectful. I think it's just about bearing in mind that one has to be ethical in your approach. And the main drawback, as far as I'm concerned, is that it requires a disproportionate amount of preparation. I do spend a lot of time designing games and preparing for them. Not all of them are worth it in the end. I've had some spectacular failures, and one has to accept that you are being experimental. It might not come off. But I do feel that you can maximize the chances of things going well if you've put in the preparation, and that does require an investment of time and effort. So I've got 3 examples of games that I use in my teaching. I've got a whole kind of treasure chest of games that I draw on, but I've just chosen these as something that's more or less quite quick and easy to do, something that's a bit more involved, and something that's very elaborate, but also really fun. So the first one is just a little classroom twist. And that is that when I am teaching about reading, so I've given students 3 preparatory readings to do, it can be very boring just to say, okay, well, these are the questions we're going to discuss about these texts. One way of just geeing it up a little bit and introducing a bit of randomness is that I cut out my questions, I roll them up, and I insert them into medication capsules. I think these capsules are used for homeopathy, but they will take a question. And what I do then is to distribute the capsules amongst the class, so it's a bit of randomness in which question you get. And they paired, so you need to then, it's like speed dating, you need to find the person that's got the same question as you, and you then collaborate on answering the question, so that when we get together as a class after 15-20 minutes, that pair can then address that question. It's a bit gimmicky, you know, it's quick and it's easy, it doesn't take too long to prepare, but it just sets a tone in the class that says, well, we're not taking this too seriously. Here's just a fun, twisty way of not just talking to the person that you're sitting next to, but getting you up and about, and you know, that element of surprise, of randomness, of opening the capsule and seeing what you've got. So that's something that's relatively simple. More elaborate game that I've developed in the context of medical professional training and used at conferences sometimes is a game around touch. It's called a Capsule Conversation. And what I do is use a coffee cup, and then it's all around haptics and touch. So I've got just some random items that have different types of textures. And then I might have a scroll with some prompts on. And this is designed to be kind of played in pairs. And they're just like kind of conversational starter type prompts. So, for example, you might be asked to write words on the cup to describe the texture of the objects that you've got. Then you might be asked to make a picture out of your objects, so the other person has to try and guess what they are. And just some, you know, probably about 4 or 5 prompts like that. And at the end, there's a surgical glove, and you write your favorite touch word on it, blow it up. And that makes for a lovely spectacle at the end when everybody gets together and waves their balloon gloves with their touch words on them. So quite a bit of prep, quite scalable though. I've played it for anything from 20 to 100 people. And it's really been just a nice way of starting a conversation with somebody you don't necessarily know, and to start just getting into a kind of conversation about texture and affect and the senses. So all of that works with this type of game. My most elaborate game is Medical Monopoly. And this is really fun to set, and the students do enjoy playing it. So we divide students into teams, and they've all got Monopoly names: battleships, rocking horses, wheelbarrows. And we send them out for the day with a question book with some site-specific questions. They're not ones you can Google. You actually have to go to the Royal Brompton Hospital or the Army Museum or the Royal College of General Practitioners to go and answer these questions. And we also have community chess cards and chance cards. And then everybody comes back at the end, and we have a judging of the creative outputs. So I'll put all of the kind of materials into a backpack for each team. Every team gets a strawberry, because one of the community chess cards is to find an inventive way for your strawberry to die, and to film that. And the chance cards work that you kind of gamble. There's a certain amount of money, in other words, points, that you gamble on opening the envelope, and then if you do the creative challenge in the envelope, then there's a chance to gain additional money. So it's a wonderful team building game. You can't get to all 20 venues, so you have to strategize. It does involve a lot of prep, but it's really fun to do, and I always enjoy it, and the students seem to enjoy it too. So my top tips for games that work is that you do need to think about your whole audience, not just about the physical abilities of people to get round if you've got a running around game like Medical Monopoly, but you have to think about what their expectations are, how they work together. If you've designed, for example, a game for pairs, what happens if somebody is absent or you don't have an even number of participants? You can't then exclude people on the basis that you haven't thought your game mechanic through properly. So all of that needs thinking through. You absolutely need to test your game as to the best of your ability. It's not always possible to do a complete run through, but if you talk it through with others and walk it through, and make sure to learn, if you're playing a game repeatedly, about what's gone right and wrong. And sometimes these things only emerge in discussion afterwards. That, for example, if you've set a treasure hunt and it has certain parameters and those have not been made clear, then your participants can get very frustrated if they spend all their time looking for something in an area where you thought you'd quite clearly signaled where it was, and it turned out they'd misunderstood that, or you hadn't communicated it or recognized the ambiguity in it. So all of that needs thinking about. It's important to strike the right balance between playfulness and usefulness. Nobody wants to spend a day wasting their time, or even an hour wasting their time. So it has to be purpose oriented. You've got to be quite clear about what your goals are. And sometimes those are kind of not about content, they're about process, they're about ice breaking or team dynamics or observation skills, or they're just about well-being, having a chance to relax and talk to people. So all of that you need to be clear about in your own mind, and you need to communicate it clearly to your participants so that they know why you're asking them or inviting them to do something. And always have a contingency plan. It is amazing what will go wrong. Medical Monopoly, you just need a venue to close early, or for a certain item that's worth a lot of points to have been taken off display, and your participants are going to get cross. So you need to be clear about what can go wrong at the beginning and how you're going to communicate that. So we always have a Twitter hashtag to warn people if there are snags in the game. But also just having the right mindset yourself so that if things go wrong, you can handle it as a game designer, I think is also important. So thinking about backup plans and what you're going to do if things don't pan out as you expect, it's really important that doesn't take you by surprise. So for me, I love games that are transformative. They make people think differently. I love a bit of a surprise. I do like a bit of subversion as well. it's not a bad thing to poke a little fun or engage in non-illegal rule breaking to some extent, hopefully with the collaboration of whoever it is, or the place that you're being a bit space that you're being a bit subversive in. I think a sense of generosity is really important. That feeling that a game is a bit of a gift that you get. It's not only a thing or a gift of somebody's time and putting the effort into the planning of it, but it's also just a respect for what participants can bring to the process. That all speaks to me of hospitality and generosity. I like games to be inspirational. I love it when people come back and say that they do feel inspired by it. So I'm always aiming to be inspirational. And something to think more carefully about in recent years is being green. I used to be a great advocate of the glow stick and going down to the pound shop and getting some cheap, fun stuff to incorporate into games. But I think more carefully about that now. I like to reuse objects and just be mindful of the impact that they have. One of my favorite reuse objects is that I got a whole lot of old language cassettes from our learning lab that are not used anymore, and that's what I use now to put my Medical Monopoly cards in. So promoting as much reuse, recycling, repurposing as possible. I think it's our ethical duty to do that nowadays. So how do you get started in this? I have 3 recommendations. In the UK, the Playful Learning Association is a magical space and place. It's full of inspirational people. I have got so many good ideas and been so inspired by being a member of the PLA. They have a few face-to-face meetings a year, and they have a wonderful conference every year. It's free to join, so I definitely recommend them. The Playful University Club, which is hosted by Exeter University, they have game nights, they have talks and workshops. So that is also open to the playful community in higher education. So that's worth joining. And then if you are thinking more broadly, then the Global Play Brigade also has a series of events and connectivity, and they're also full of good ideas. So connecting with like-minded individuals is a great way to get started. Should you need further persuasion, I just offer these words by Albert Einstein, no greater authority, that play is actually the highest form of research. So when we're in our higher education environments, which research is highly prized, do feel free to quote these words if you need to persuade anybody that playful learning has a worthy space in higher education. Thank you.
You couldn't see me during that presentation, but I was just nodding the whole time. Everything you say just makes total sense. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk on recess, Giskin. I've learned a lot. I'll be signing up for the PLA just after this finishes. I have 2 quick questions for you. So you talked a lot about the benefits of play in a very fun and friendly atmosphere. A lot of bonding activities, really high quality icebreakers, something that I think could be incorporated into most educational practice in the beginning weeks. But have you used play in a summative function to give a grade to a student or students?
I have not. I'm not sure how that would go down. I have heard of people kind of designing, for example, escape rooms around using course material to get a particular outcome, to solve problems, which sometimes are graded. So I think it can be done, but I do worry a little that will take the fun out of it, and it becomes then not playful, but a rather stressful form of assessment.
Yeah.
I think what I have done is I've used it for actual content in a way that is quite playful. In that, when I was teaching science communication, I wrote a whole lot of statements on index cards that were of various degrees of controversy, and we did a sort of game where you had to find people, you had to organize your cards in order of affirmation. So the statements you agreed with most, of the statements you agreed with least, and then there was going around and swapping cards to get a set you could more realistically agree with, and then joining up with people and then presenting that content. And I guess that allows for assessment if you need to, but I would always think that should be perhaps formative. You can give advice for people, but I think it would kind of kill the playfulness if you made it assessed.
Yeah, cool, awesome. And so then my final question is in regards to getting students to think or create a game. So I'm sure you collect feedback from your games, and that's how they develop over time. As you said, they need to be tried and tested. But yeah, when it comes to students and creating games, what's your experience been there?
Magical. So I think that is absolutely wonderful because you learn so much by designing a game. So we've done this quite a few times. That often it's in the context of creative activity. So students have a choice of how to look at something. And actually, in quite a serious subject like health inequalities, students have created amazing games like board games, which articulate the hurdles that people have to go through to get access, say, to healthcare. But my favorite one of all time has been where we ran a weekend workshop for students to create escape room games around science content. So it wasn't just medical, it was from all over. And there were lots of wonderful things that came out of that. But the most successful was actually an escape room in a backpack called Breaking Bag. And it's just been such a success. We've used it at festivals, we've used it in schools, and students have designed different types of puzzles. And that's had a knock-on effect, because in schools then they invite pupils to design their own, or students to design their own puzzles to make a escape game in a backpack. So got lots of different layers. You have to solve locks and find the keys and answer questions, work out the answers, all different types of locks, directional locks, word locks. They're not just, and of course combination locks. So I think some of the most rewarding experiences around play have been where students have designed games. Or also they've just taken the things we've done in class and gone off and done their own things in their student societies, right? So there are lots of versions of Medical Monopoly out there. And one of my colleagues runs the whole induction for the medical school on Orientationopoly, similar concept, but on a much bigger scale, and a more broader, around campus orientation. So there are lots of lovely things one can do, and absolutely giving students agency to do that is one fantastic learning opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we can find some instructions on how to create our own breaking bags on the PLA. If not, perhaps if you have something that is shareable, I can include it in the links below, because I think those bags, when we first spoke months and months and months ago, I automatically put breaking bags up on my projects list, because I just think it's something that I would love to do as a teacher. So yeah, great ideas all the time. I'm so glad we caught up again. Thank you again for all of your time.
You're very welcome.